we began a week ago a theme that will carry us through the year, a theme focused on what my friend Richard and his organization have claimed is the number one most important quality that consumers look for in a company. Not the quality of the product, not the loyalty out of love, but are they trustworthy companies? Do they walk their talk? The new brand equity in the world is trust. And so we're exploring trust, and the verses that we've been singing and chanting along with Ariel, whose beautiful melody has accompanied us throughout this week. Im takum alai machaneh lo yira libi. I'm not going to be afraid. Bezot, in this I trust. And we explored on Rosh Hashanah, Bezot, the one who stands before you might surprise you, leave room for a new story. Remember that one? Leave room for a new story. We talked a little bit about the shofar as that symphony of that possibility that after the broken notes and after the confusion, there might be another note that comes that's the strong note. Leave room for surprise. Leave room for a new story. And then we talked as well about trusting that we can hold those broken notes between two long tikiyot, two long powerful notes of the shofar. And so here we are tonight on Yom Kippur, and we have another bezot, another with this. In fact, this with this, in the tradition, that word again, can you say it with me? Bezot. 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 Bezot means with this. The entire Yom Kippur, the entire ritual of the Yom Kippur, from the beginning to the middle to the end, the entire thing in the Torah comes down to one verse in chapter 16 of the book of Leviticus that we'll look at tomorrow morning. Bezot yavo Aaron el HaKodesh. With this, Aaron enters into the holy, the Kodesh. In the context of the verses, it's a series of animals and sacrifices that become the rite during the temple period. I'd like to explore my own bezot with it. My own, maybe midrash, maybe expansion, maybe my own heart at this moment where we are today as a community, both locally and globally. We'll come back to this, I promise. But first, a word from our sponsor. Let's take a breath together, okay? And let's do this breath this way. Take a deep breath, everybody. Exhale. Nice. Now, before I ask you to take another one, I'm going to give you an instruction. I'm going to ask you not to take another one. I want you now, wherever you are, just exhale. And notice. Wait. Wait. Just notice if you can wait long enough before you have to inhale. Let's do it again. Okay. For some of you, that might have been a really easy exercise. For the vast majority of us, though, something kicks in at various stages of our exhalation cycle that interferes with a full exhalation, a full and complete emptying of the breath. We don't really empty our lungs before we fill them again. We really are not even aware of the subtle but powerful impulse that we have to override our body's natural pause at the end of each breath cycle. Intentionally and willfully, we curtail the natural pause that our evolutionary programming, the wisdom that we have, has given us. Every breath has a pause after you exhale. It waits and waits. And trusting that the breath will rise again of its own accord, we too wait. It makes sense that we wouldn't notice that pause. It makes sense for so many of us that we wouldn't necessarily trust that another breath is on the way. I get it. I do. Most of us never really learn the art of waiting, of delaying. Most of us wait to exhale. That's true. But we also don't wait to inhale. When I was a young man, I became heavily involved in a school of breathing. I know, a school of breathing, right? It wasn't a school that was rooted in the teachings of the East, of India or China, but rather the gymnasium movement in Germany. The name of that school was Carola Speeds, and she was a pioneering teacher of this approach. And unlike yogic breathing, which focused heavily on manipulating the breath, longer breaths or shorter breaths, you've heard people do that, like take a long breath, 4 count, and then another 4 count when you exhale. She wasn't into any of that. Essentially, Speeds had a whole different approach. She basically said that there's no correct way to breathe. There's no right breath. There's no pranayama, chi breathing, none of that. She said, you already know how to breathe. You know how to breathe. Essentially, she argued that your respiratory system is an adaptive muscle. And what we do more often than not is we inhibit the natural breathing cycle of the body. We shouldn't replace shallow breathing, she said, with an ideal form of breathing, but by trusting our natural breathing to auto-adjust itself throughout our day. Essentially, she argued that we had to unlearn everything that we had learned about breathing. Well, I'll tell you something, one of the most advanced techniques that she had, after I'd already tapped my chest and done all kinds of straw exercises to limit the amount of breath that was coming out during an exhale, months and months of working with this teacher, there was one very advanced technique, and it was very simple. It involved waiting patiently at the end of each full exhalation for the body to naturally begin to inhale. This was an incredibly difficult exercise for me, and maybe for some of you before. You see, once I began to watch my breathing, I wanted to interfere with my breathing. The minute I brought awareness and attention to the breath as I exhaled, it was almost precisely that moment that I said, you know what, I better breathe. I'm gonna die. The urge to interfere is premature inhalation. Waiting for breath to return is a powerful example of how we push life and miss the powerful possibilities that pausing provides us. In many ways, the last 18 months have been part of a great global pause. Our economies have come to a grinding halt over that time. However, our inactivity led to much natural renewal. As the transmission of the coronavirus increased rapidly, the whole world adopted a lockdown, restricting us in our human mobility. The imposition of a quarantine stopped all of the commercial activity that greatly affects the various important environmental parameters which are directly connected to human health. As all the types of social, economic, industrial, and urbanization activity suddenly shut off, nature took advantage and showed improvement. The quality of our air, cleaner rivers, less noise pollution, undisturbed and calm wildlife. There were some who were so bold as to argue that the virus was the Earth's vaccination against we humans. In many ways, we stand here, poised and paused, for a return to life, a return to an inhale, and I worry. How will we bring our pauses forward? How will we wait long enough to inhale? Every 7th year, the Torah obligates ancient Israelites to observe a sabbatical year. It's called Shemitah. It's more than likely that few of you have ever heard of Shemitah. Kind of bad marketing. It kind of goes with a rag called a shmata. You don't really want to... But you've heard of a sabbatical. So Shemitah is a radical Jewish idea. It's a biblical commandment to imagine a better life. We're instructed to observe a sabbatical every 7 years so that the land, the workers, the social, the economic system have a chance to rest and to reset. In its simplest form, the Torah mandates that all lands be ownerless and wild during the entire year. Selling produce was prohibited. Private property was not private during that year. It was forbidden to work the land at all. All debts were forgiven. Everything reset. Everyone paused. And Shemitah is just one piece of a larger pausing portfolio, if you will. The Shemitah year is the analog in the year of what we are now in the 7th month of our calendar. This month is the Shemitah month. Like the 7th year, it invites us to pause. How many people have heard, when are we going back to school? Got to wait for another Jewish holiday. All of them are in this month. Every week, 52 times a year, Shemitah arrives as one day called the Sabbath, Shabbat. We pause. Pausing. This feature gives us an insight into what we might do as we pause forward. The feature of the biblical Shabbat in all of its flavors was decidedly counterculture. Shabbat in the Torah taught that humanity had the right to rest, that work without not work was slavery. Zecher L'Yetziat Mitzrayim, when we say the prayers on Friday night and Shabbat, Shabbat is not just about creation, but about justice. Work without not work is unhealthy, it's unnatural. It's a rebellion against the commodification of humanity, the never-ending search for more perfection, more progress, and more production. Every single pause, every little Shabbat, every time we wait to inhale, we are asserting our fundamental essence as not human doings, but human beings. Every pause is an expression of faith and trust that life that is stronger than you or me, my will or yours, will breathe us again. The human being's organism happens autonomously, the breathing function. It needs no effort or interference on our part. Pausing is needed and natural. When we override our basic, innate bodily intelligence, we hurriedly take in life new breathing, as if we can't wait to inhale because we can't get enough. Every pause is a rebellion. Every pause is a rebel with a pause. Thank you. Rest is resistance. Pausing is countercultural, and I don't just mean resting as in couch surfing on your parents' dime. I don't mean laziness or sloth. I don't mean learned helplessness and Peter Panning ourselves. I mean the kind of rest that takes courage, the kind of pause that gives us back our deep humanity, the kind of rest that requires faith and ultimately trust. Rabbi Arthur Waskow writes about Shabbat, what would have happened if God hadn't paused? What if God had become so joyful in the process of creating the 6 days that she continued straight on into a 7th and an 8th? He writes, an artist will tell you, if you're painting a picture, there comes a moment when that one more stroke will ruin it. You have to know when to stop, to catch your breath and be at peace with your painting. And then on another canvas, you can start over. But always in that rhythm, there must be a pause to the not doing. And if you will not stop to rest, he writes, the work will stop anyway, willy-nilly by ruination. If we refuse to rest, we will be forced to. How many people here in their lives were so busy working, so busy succeeding, so busy achieving, so busy running and running and running, until finally that which they couldn't run from caught up to them. How many of us resisted pausing until we had no choice? How many of us put off and had Corona with no silver linings or learnings? Had not Corona come along, we would not have stopped. Arthur Wasco says Shabbat and Shemitah and this month every year invites us to stop and feel the presence of the sacred. He writes, Shabbat is the acceptance of mystery over mastery. Love that. Mystery over mastery. Mystery over mastery. Doesn't mean, of course, that we curse technology, work, production, consumption, or even accumulation. It means that all of those things are within the context of Shabbat. Something else happens when we rest and we stop our busyness. Stopping allows us to see what we've been glossing over. We get to experience the power that nature calls dormancy. Dormancy, that which is holding, the heartbeat that rests, the hibernating animals, all of the winter, waiting and waiting. Dormancy is pausing. I'll tell you, in the 14 years since I started this shul on my own with a little bit of help from my parents, on a little drum in a gym on 105th Street in Amsterdam, I neglected to take off more than 2 weeks in 14 years. Each and every one of my colleagues had already had multiple sabbaticals by the time I took off this past June. I had no idea what to do with myself for the first 2 weeks. With each and every passing moment, in the emptiness of not being a rabbi and not having phone calls to make and emails to respond to and sermons to think about and teachings to offer, I found myself, like the breathing exercise we did, yearning to inhale even work. The practice of pausing is a skill, it's an art form. There are seeds inside each and every one of us, inside this culture, that can't emerge because we don't know that dormancy does not mean death. Resting doesn't mean disappearing. What keeps us from stopping is that we're terrified of resting. We're terrified of finding out the terrible things that we might feel if we stop. We fear that if we stop for even a moment, the sheer enormity of our lives will overwhelm us, our outspoken and unspoken fears. So like a stone being thrown over a lake, we learn to skip so that we don't get too wet. And we're terrified that if the stone would fall, we would disappear. We dance around that security. We dance around that insecurity. Can we slow down, pause, and wait so that we might stop the dance around the void? As someone once said, an avoid dance. Avoidance. When we pause, we reflect. When we pause, we see. When we pause, we rebel. And we become rebels with a pause. Sometimes Tara Brach, in her book Radical Acceptance, writes, sometimes through the art of pausing, we develop the capacity to stop hiding. We begin to trust in our natural intelligence. By pressing the pause button on life, we give ourselves the space to realign with our values and our visions. This pausing is remarkable. Not only is it holy, not only is it required, not only can it help us reorient ourselves towards the world that we are about to re-inhabit and re-inhale, But more fundamentally, pausing is at the heart of all change. It was the famous psychologist Viktor Frankl who wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." Even if you're not convinced that you need to take a sabbatical, even if you're not convinced that to keep Shabbat on some level this year will itself become a radical way for you to bring pausing forward, even if you're not convinced that pausing in the Torah's understanding of Shemitah can act as a model for us in how we might re-understand our obligation to save our mother, the earth. Each and every one of us here on Yom Kippur can readily understand how pausing interacts with pattern breaking. How many people here wish they had paused before they pressed send? One time. How many people here wish they had paused before they reacted to the child who's screaming at 11 o'clock at night? Okay, that's me. Okay, wait a second. Sorry. My wife left. How many of us just yesterday would have wished that they could have held back something that came out? How many of us, when we think about the mistakes in our lives, wish we had 4 more seconds right over there? To not say that, to have said that, to not do that, to have done that. Becoming professional pausers is tantamount to be taking charge of transformation itself. In the book that Hermann Hesse wrote named Siddhartha, how many people read Siddhartha? And I had that book by my bed for years. There's a moment in Siddhartha's journey where the businessman, Kumaraswamy, says to him, "So Siddhartha, what is it that you have, Siddhartha?" And Siddhartha said 3 things. Do people remember? He said, "I can think, I can fast, and I can wait." He had the ability to delay gratification. He had the ability to press pause on his life and on his decision-making process. He had the ability to take reflection as itself the hallmark of self-discipline. He knew how to wait before inhaling. He knew how to be a rebel with a pause. We began with Yom Kippur, and Bezot Yavo Aron El HaKodesh. With this, Aaron will enter the holy. Yom Kippur is called Shabbat Shabbaton. It is the Sabbath of Sabbaths. It is the Uber Sabbath. It is the Shabbat. It's the day that has all of the Shabbat energy within it. It's the ultimate pause on life. Coming here wearing shrouds, thinking about our mortality. It's 24 hours of stopping, dropping, breathing. So what will you see today? What will you feel today? What will you touch? What will you remember? And what will it inspire in you as we, in your heart and mind, in the coming year, to develop the skills that might allow you that space between stimulus and response? Will you, like Aaron, tomorrow morning enter into the Holy of Holies with the pause needed to metabolize our experience before lifting another fork to our mouths for one more bite? Where will all the grief go if we don't pause to hold it? Where will all the sadness and the disappointment go if we don't make space and room in our lives to feel it? Where will it be? We stand on the precipice, friends. We stand on the precipice of a moment that might never come again. We hope it won't. But woe to us if we don't take from these last 18 months of pausing a way that we might transform our lives and learn how to wait before we inhale, to pause before we speak, to hold on a bit before we react, and to stop for a minute each and every day to appreciate what it is that is right here in front of us. I'm certainly a fan of this beautiful chant. And I wonder if, as we chant it now, slowly and then building together, each and every one of you might say something inwardly about a promise to pause. A promise to pause. If all things are surrounding us and assailing us, if life is moving at 3-4 times the speed, if on a day when we're told to fast, we might slow down, what might we become aware of? What might we bring into our lives that will say, with this pausing, I trust life again? Bezot ani boteach. So let's exhale completely. And wait.